Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. And in this video I want to discuss not necessarily the runic alphabet itself that was used in the Viking Age, meaning the Younger Futhark, the 16-letter runic alphabet descended from the 24-letter Elder Futhark used much earlier, but rather the stylistics of the Younger Futhark as used in the Viking Age, especially the question that I get so often about the difference between the so-called long branch and short branch versions of those runes. Alright, so the Younger Futhark alphabet is not very stable over time. In the earliest inscriptions, we still see letters that are carried over from the Elder Futhark, especially the A, the H, and the M shapes. So in a very early inscription, say the Rune inscription from Denmark, we see some of those early forms. Over time, though, the 16 letters more or less stabilize, but they stabilize in two different ways. Now, in Scandinavian research, these are usually called the langkviste runer and the kortkviste runer, the long branch and the short branch runes. In English, I've also seen them called long branch and short twig. I tend to just kind of fall back in long branch and short branch. Now, at one time, the long branch were often called the Danish runes, and the short branch were often called Swedish Norwegian. It's not necessarily that clear cut. It's true that most of what you'll see in Denmark is long branch, but there are long branch inscriptions in Sweden and Norway too. And in French, in fact, short branch seems to have been kind of a fad, well, a long-lasting fad. You see it starting in the late 700s and lasting into the late 900s, concentrated in Sweden, but by 1000, even in Sweden, it's mostly long branch or a mix of long branch and short branch. Now, if we look at the two together, we'll notice that many of the letter shapes are the same, but where they often differ is you can see the short twig as being a little bit more efficient. So where branches come off of the central vertical line or staff, the long branch may have those branches coming off on both sides, but short branch will simplify it so where they're only coming off on one side. So you see that, for instance, in the Os rune, or in the Naudr rune, or in the Or rune. And then complex multi-stroke designs like Hagal, Sol, Mother, and Yr are reduced to just a staff and a dot, or just a half staff. Now, one of the most famous inscriptions in short twig is Sweden's Rökstone, which was briefly in the news in January 2020, a lifetime ago, I know, after Henrik Williams et al. Published a paper claiming an interesting new idea about what that inscription meant. I made a couple videos about that at the time, including one with Henrik Williams you can find on my channel. And then among the most famous in long branch are Denmark's Yelling stones, the style of which provides the basis for my own Younger Futhark runic writing, which you can see on this channel or in Disney's Frozen or in places in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, another different style of runes in the Younger Futhark period were the hidden runes, or in Scandinavian scholarship, the Lynruner. These make use of the way the runes are organized in their alphabet to code a message. So, this kind of goes back to the Elder Futhark, where you had 24 runes arranged in 3 groups of 8. And the Younger Futhark, these are arranged in a group of 6, 5, and 5, but those 3 groups are each still called at, which in Old Norse means a group of 8 or family. Now, what you have then is at 1, at 2, and at 3. And what you can do with these Lynruner, these code runes, is put down a staff, vertical, top to bottom, or any other shape that you want. Make it a man's face, make it a fish, make it a bird, just a straight line, whatever. Then on the left, you draw strokes, or, some other image, but the count of them, 1 to 3 on the left, represents the at of the rune that you're drawing from. The first at, the second at, the third at. And then on the right side, you put a number of lines or whatever drawing you're coding this as that equals the number that that rune is in the at. So for example, if you want to write Kaun, the K rune, you write one line on the left because it's from the first at, but then you draw 6 lines on the right because it is the 6th rune in that at. So here's my own whimsical take on it, showing you the word raven or raven with the number of feathers on the bird's left or right wing representing the Lunruner code. So you have the feathers on the left wing representing which at the rune is in, the feathers on the right wing representing which rune in the at it is. Now, why do this at all? Well, of course, don't we all like to show off when we know what something means and nobody else knows what it means, right? This whole point of writing for academic journals. But also, it's fun, right? And I'm sure that's a big part of it. It's not like the messages that are in these Lunruner typically tend to be particularly secretive or cryptic or important. Probably people are kind of messing around and showing off and just having a good time, right? Something you can do around the fire, probably on a long winter night. In the same way that you might have some fun, drawing or practicing some calligraphy or something today. Now, by the late 900s, we also see another change in the Younger Futhark, or kind of an optional change in the Younger Futhark. The alphabet ceases to distinguish between regular oral A and nasal A, and repurposes the rune that originally meant the nasal A, the rune os, to mean O, which removes the sound O from the portfolio of the rune ur, which we transcribe as a U. Now, for a little bit more information about which runes represent what in classic Younger Futhark, see my video called Writing Old Norse Runes. Now, the portfolio of the rune ur is then further reduced when the rune ur ceases to be used for an R descended from an old Z and begins to be used instead for the vowel Y, U. After that, dots might also be used to distinguish a sound different from the basic one implied by a rune's name. Now, we know from the rune poems, we have the Norwegian and Icelandic rune poems, and I've made a video about the Norwegian rune poem you can find on this channel, that people probably learned the names of the runes as ways to remember what the runes meant, right? And each rune name, except for ur, had the basic sound that it meant as the first sound of the rune. So is, the basic sound is E, which is written as the letter I in the Roman alphabet, or as the rune is in the runic alphabet. Now, as the dotted runes developed, what you had was a system where the original name gives you the basic meaning of that rune, but then if you dot the rune, just put a dot on it somewhere, that indicates that it's a secondary meaning of the same rune, to clear up confusion, right? It's effectively making it sort of visually a different letter. So for instance, the rune Kaun still basically means K if you see it alone, but then you can dot it to indicate that it means G, right? To clear up the confusion, because Kaun can mean K or G in classic Younger Futhark. So then you might have a word like Ugur, one of the names of Odin, written this way in classic Younger Futhark, where it would be transcribed UK capital R, or in this newer developing Younger Futhark you start seeing around the year 1000, you can have it written this way, which clears up the confusion and shows you that it is in fact YGR. They still typically don't write the same rune twice in a row, so you have to kind of supply the second G. Or is still basically means I, the sound E, but then we can dot it to make it clear that we mean E, right, the sound A, so that, for example, Siv, Thor's wife, or the peace between family members, would be written with the basic is, but Sev, a type of grass, will be written with the dotted I to indicate that it's an E. Or the rune Tyr basically means T. Now we can dot it to show that we mean a D, so we don't get confused. So for example, Tomer, meaning empty would be written this way in this developing later Younger Futhark, but domer, judgment, this way to indicate that we've clearly got a D, not a T. Confusion that otherwise prevails in 800s, 900s inscriptions. Or then bjarkan means B, but we dot it and we get a P. So we get Brester, breaks, versus Prester, Christian priest. And in the same way as these dots are developing to distinguish these runes, we start seeing the vowel runes that come in long branch versus short branch styles get specialized, so each can mean a different thing now. So we end up with and sometimes these runes get reversed, we end up with the long branch version of os, meaning usually the so-called huko or /o, whereas the short twig means just the basic o. And then long branch or ends up meaning ash, so like kala, make cold, but then the short twig version of or ends up meaning just the basic a, kala, be cold. Sometimes we can even get distinct versions of huko from /o, including in the 1100s in Orkney. So with something like this system in the 1100s in Orkney, we can end up with a Younger Futhark fully expanded to have equivalent letters to every letter in the Roman alphabet used to write native Old Norse words. A, B, D, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, R, S, T, U, Y, thorn, ash, /o, huko. Now, C, Q, and W aren't used in native Old Norse words. Sometimes you will see them used you'll see them come up with Latin equivalents to these Latin letters in runes, like in the Brigand inscriptions from Bergen, but that's not necessary for writing Old Norse. Length marks aren't really used in this early period. That's somewhat an insistence of modern scholars more than medieval writers. I and J are regarded as the same letter, U and V is the same letter. Thorn and Ed aren't distinguished in the earliest Norse manuscripts, and then X and Z are really combinations of K and S or T and S, but with all those provisos, you do have full equivalence to the Roman alphabet. Now, you could consider that the influence of the Roman alphabet. That could be what's happening here. They're seeing that the Roman alphabet can distinguish more sounds than the runic alphabet can, and they're kind of rising to the occasion and developing the runic alphabet to have equivalence to all of those distinguished letters. It could also be, maybe, of course, that Roman alphabet influence could be considered the dreaded Christian influence. But it could also be a native development. The elder Futhark was able to distinguish all these sounds, and even though the younger Futhark lost those distinctions, clearly speakers are sometimes going to struggle to read younger Futhark inscriptions just like people today do. So this could actually be a fairly native development too. Yes, it is coinciding roughly with when Scandinavia is getting Christianized, but it's noticeable that that's also about the time that more and more runic inscriptions are being written. So maybe there's actually a sort of native drive toward more literacy at this time too. It's otherwise hard to explain why you have more runic inscriptions while the countries are getting Christianized. Again, sort of against the dreaded Christian influence narrative that says that runes declined after the Christian conversion. But note that still in the very late 900s to 1100s, these expansions are still kind of an optional thing. Count can still mean K or G if someone decides to write with just the basic 16-letter Futhark, or just thinks you can figure it out. So for example, Dverker, this still has to mean Dverker because there's no word Dverker, so the writer still might not dot that Count rune to indicate that it's clearly a G, because there's just no word to confuse it with. It's also noticeable that these additional expanded letters don't get names. Just the 16 original Younger Futhark runes have names. So the Icelandic and Norwegian rune poems actually come from a time when these dotted runes were beginning to be used, but the modifications must be thought of as actually not constituting separate letters. It must be kind of more like we think of accent marks today, or even sort of punctuation, because they never give them names, and only those original 16 Younger Futhark runes have names. So you have that basic set of 16 that continues to be used well into the 1100s, 1200s, at which point the dots and such become a little bit more obligatory, and we can really speak of the new quote-unquote medieval runes. But they have the option for this expanded set that can make your runic writing much clearer, and which is preferred by, for example, Henrik Williams when he writes for customers and runes today. All right, well, I hope that's cleared up a little bit about the different styles of runes in the Younger Futhark period. Thank you so much to Patreon for helping support these videos. And for now, I am thankful to be wishing you happy Thanksgiving and all the best from beautiful Wyoming.